Hello and welcome to a very special How I Paint Things. Now it's been a little while, it has been outrageously hot, so I thought it would be cool to do something which followed in a similar theme. And luckily the guys over at Dead Earth Games sent me along a handful of their pirates for Dead Seas? Pirates of the Dread Seas, that's it. And they've got some really cool sculpts in there. There were a handful of others that they sent along, but I thought the one that would be the most fun would be the Dwarf Pirate, because how often do you see Dwarf Pirates? Shout out, of course, to everybody who remembers Long Drong Slayers. They were pretty rad. Now I'm going to concentrate on fairly simple stuff this time around. I really want to get back to basics, and this fella took me about an hour worth of total painting time, so nice result, I think, for a fairly quick turnaround. All the paints are going to be listed in the description below, so without any further mucking around, let's get started. Now I've primed our dwarf here with a spray of Wraithbone, and then given him a quick pass over with some Wraithbone from the pot, just to make sure that I had a nice smooth primer. I actually really like this colour. It's really good if you're planning on painting something white that you want to have a little bit of warmth to it. And since we're painting a pirate, sun-bleached clothing is what sort of springs to mind for me. So light colours is what I think is going to be the order of the day. I've got here Macragge Blue. I'm going to start by painting some stripes onto his trousers. Now don't worry too much about how this goes on. As you can see, I've put just a little bit of water into my paint to help it flow. Now ordinarily, this might be easier actually. Haha! Because you see, because of the curvature of his belly, if I was to try and paint in that direction, I'd probably find it quite difficult. So instead, let's paint this way. Oh dear. This might be a little easier without the camera in the way. But let's try and paint in some lines on his trousers. And what I'd suggest is once you've done one on the front, flick around to the back and try and mirror that position. Because once you've sort of got front and back marked, you've got a better idea of how much space you have to play with for the other stripes. So I'm going to just carefully block these in. And as you can see, I'm not being terribly careful, because any mistakes I do make, I can come back with the Macragge Blue in a couple of minutes. Not Macragge Blue, with the Wraithbone rather, and fix those up. But let's just start blocking these in. Now after a couple of passes with Macragge Blue, we've got the stripes on his trousers. And you can see I've made kind of a pig's eye of that as I was going along. There are quite some big blotches. Now ordinarily I would suggest when you're doing your touch-up stages, you're tidying up, to leave those near the last step. But I've got here some Wraithbone, just a little bit of water in it. All I'm going to do is tidy up these stripes now. Reason being, we aren't going to do anything else to the trousers until we get after shading them, so it's not going to slow me down any to do this stage now. And I'm a little fussy, so I want to get an idea of how this is going to look. Yeah, and tidying these up is a good way to, sort of save yourself a little bit of worry. Now, as you can see, those stripes still aren't really perfect, but I don't really mind. Ultimately, what we want is just something that looks like striped trousers on the table, and that's going to look fine. I don't think they had any colour-fast washing material, back in the... well, I suppose he's a dwarf. Did they ever have colour-fast washing machines? It doesn't matter. Anyway, I've got some Cadian Fleshtone, and we're going to paint over his skin. You'll see this being quite a light base coat. We'll get, plenty of coverage from this. But you may find that in some areas, especially larger, flatter areas of skin, you're going to want to come back and give that a second coat. And when you come to his face, what I'd say is don't worry too much about hitting beard and eyebrows and stuff like that, because we're going to paint those another colour later. Now after a couple of passes on his skin, we might as well get in and do his hair. There's not really a right colour for this, but I'm going to go with, this is Skrag Brown, and you'll see it's got kind of an orangey colour to it. So just be a little careful with this as we come near areas of skin that we have painted. And as you'll see, I'm getting a little bit of the base coat, so the primer rather, showing through. So we will need to come back and give this a second coat. Now that is a fearsome shade. What I've got is some Evil Sunz Scarlet next, and we'll just paint in his bandana. Now because this is a layer paint, again you're going to find that you might have some areas where you end up with a little bit of the primer showing through. But don't worry, just let this first coat dry and come back and do a second if you need to. Now to start painting in the leather details, I'm actually going to go to a Vallejo colour. This is Mahogany Brown. If you wanted to stick purely to Citadel stuff, something like Cadian Fleshtone or maybe Rhinox Hide, that'll be slightly darker, but it will look fairly similar. I just like this for the coverage it gives, and it is quite a nice, warm sort of leathery colour. All I'm going to do is cover over all of the leather areas, and you'll see when it comes to belt buckles and similar, don't worry about those, just paint straight over the top of them. Now isn't that a nice colour? I really think if you have the opportunity, maybe your local stockist, has a range of different paints, or you can find them easily online, have a little experiment with different paint manufacturers. I'm always talking about Army Painter and Vallejo, but if you do like the look of something else that's out there, then give it a try. You might find something that you really like. I'm just using a little bit of black to paint in his scabbard. You could do this in the same colour as all the other leather, but I tend to think these are a little darker, and they do look better when they stand out quite a bit. I'm going to go ahead and paint in all of his weapons handle at the same time. Now what I've got is some Leadbelcher, and any sort of dark metallic colour here will do the job, to be honest. But those belt buckles I mentioned, not worrying about earlier, let's just get in there now, give them a quick coat of a metallic colour. This particular fella as well, he has got some buckles on his boots. Just take your time. And if it helps at all, you can have a look at the examples online for how they, other suggestions of how you might want to paint them. At the same time, I will go ahead and fill in his tankard, because I figured this is going to be pewter. So a nice dark colour for this will do the job. And now finally for our base coats, I've got some Vallejo Flat Green. Now if you wanted to, you could use maybe Warboss Flesh would be a good sort of substitute for this. What I'm going to do is fill in the glass bottle. Now with all of our base coats done, we can get on to applying some shades. And if you know me, this is normally where I drown the model in Agrax Earthshade, but we're actually going to use a couple of different colours to get some different effects out of the base coats that we've put on so far. So we'll start off with Cadian Fleshtone, and I'm going to apply this, funnily enough, to all of his skin. And just being careful once we approach the edges of any detail. But at the same time, I'm also, so if we get his hair and his all that in shot, I'm going to cover over his hair and his bandana in this same shade. Then we'll give that about 10-20 minutes to dry. See what we get when we come back. Now you'll see that it hasn't actually done very much to the red, but that's not a problem because we can of course highlight that ourselves. But for the skin, what a lot of depth and real character that brings out again. So I've got my Agrax Earthshade, because of course, and what I'm going to do is do sort of a waist down with this. So all of the leather and his trousers, and we'll use this to get a little bit of different colour between his shirt and his trousers. So just applying Agrax Earthshade all over those areas, and same procedure. Give it about 20-30 minutes to dry. Now while that's drying, as long as you're careful, you can apply the Seraphim Sepia over his shirt at the same time. And you might see straight away, that's what he was talking about. The difference in colour with the shades makes that Wraithbone quite different, and it'll give us a different approach on how we want to do the white on both trousers and shirt. As you can see here, just by changing the shade that we use on his trousers and his shirt, we get two completely different colours in the end, which, nice and simple, saves us having to do different base coats. Let's get some Nuln Oil, and I'm just going to cover over his tankard, and we'll do any other sort of stray metal bits. Now while that's drying, we can get our Cadian Fleshtone again, and go back and add just a little more definition to his arms and his face. For example here on the back of his knuckles, you can sort of draw in some of the shape of his hand there. I might be a A little bit generous with that, to be honest, but once that dries off a little, it'll look a bit smoother. Now this stage is strictly optional. You could go along, if you like the sort of slightly more sunburned look that just the shade over the top of the skin colour will give you, I recommend you could highlight just backs of knuckles, his nose and stuff with a little bit of Kislev flesh. But I think just tidying up the skin tone a little first will give us a better result in the end. That's up for you to decide. Now, as you'll see, that gives us quite a subtle effect. It's one that doesn't really stand out terribly well on the tabletop. Great for if you want to take photos, but I think we can do a little better to make him pop a bit at arm's length. So I've got some Kislev flesh, and what we'll do is just a little on the back of places like his knuckles. Fingers up here are a good spot for this. You know, if you tilt him forward, you can see his nose too, so along the bridge of his nose. Anywhere that you really want to accentuate the shape of his skin. So let's come back once I've had a chance to do that, see what that looks like. As you can see, haven't really gone overboard on that, just enough to add back some definition to those areas that I might have gone a little bit overboard with earlier. Now what I've got, this is some Deathclaw Brown. I'm going to show you an easy way to do beards and stuff like that. So rather than trying to painstakingly paint every, stray hair with the tip of your brush, lay it on sideways, just kind of drag it along those areas where you want a little bit of highlighting on his beard. And you'll see it will occasionally dip into some of the crevices and sort of gaps between, but don't worry too much about that. Now you can probably see I've just done a quick colour test on his chest. Honestly, sometimes you really just want to take a shot. See if something that you think is going to look good will look good, because if it doesn't, we could have painted over this. But this is Dawn Yellow, and I'm going to use this to just fill in some of the areas of his shirt. Now you'll see there's a little bit of pitting on the front of the miniature here, and if I were a more patient individual, I could have just used a filler primer or something to sort of do away with that, but I didn't, because I'm lazy. And what you end up with as a result is some of that sort of showing through, especially when you shade it, because of course the shade will just flow into all those little pits. Perfectly natural, something that does happen with metal miniatures, and could have been mitigated if I were more patient. Now let's just paint over it, tidy that up. As you can see, I've used the shade as a guide for sort of where I want the recesses to stay that darker yellow, and then painted over the top of most of everything else. Now you will one day know the incredible pain that is a model that looks better from the back than it does from the front. What I've got now is going back to some Wraithbone. So we're going to use our primer color and just do a few little highlights. This will barely show up in some areas, but it will make a bit of a difference. So just a few areas on extreme edges of his sleeves and what have you. I actually have a little bit too much water in my paint there, to be honest. But just go around now. I want to accentuate some of the higher points of his clothing. Now there's not a right answer to this. My advice is to sort of try and replicate some of the things that you see. Like if you see somebody's work that does clothing in a way that you really like, then, well, copy it. It's not like tracing in that you are using someone else's work as a guide rather than being able to copy it directly. And you'll find, I think, that you start to get more of a feel for how and where these clothing creases should show up. And then because of the fact we haven't actually done anything to change the colour on the trousers, I'm going to use Wraithbone again just to pick a few areas and tidy up that white just a little bit. You don't have to go overboard with this, just a few little splashes here and there. We do want it to look quite rough. And then finally, carrying on the theme of incredibly bright highlights, I've got here, this is some Fire Dragon Bright, and we'll just pick a couple of areas to accentuate the shape of his bandana. You see, I can't quite keep this in shot. So there we can see again that from the back he looks a little more interesting than he does from the front. But I think that's going to work pretty well. Again, we're looking for a dude who looks his best at arm's length, and I think those real bright highlights are going to help do the job. What I'm going to do now is bung a quick varnish on him, and I'm going to use Munitorum Varnish Spray. So let's give it a couple of seconds and see what that looks like. And once that's had a chance to dry, you'll see that it does have a slight satin finish to it. There's a little bit of a shine, but I do quite like how that looks, and it also helps bring together some of the highlights. So let's go ahead now and pop a base on him. I'm thinking something sandy, carrying on with the pirate theme. And there we have it, our dwarf is complete. And again, the magic power that is a base, to really make a miniature look finished. Now this was a lot of fun. I really think this goes towards sort of demonstrating how you can use a very light primer to get a few different effects without having to worry with, dozens of different colors over top. Just those shades, for example, with the shirt and then the trousers, goes some way to showing that, I think. So again, thank you very much to Dead Earth Games for sending these pirates along. This was a lot of fun. And as always, shout out to Exit 23 Games for the light and sound equipment, along with the patrons who helped us make this possible, including producers Jonathan Harris, Alan Nuttall, Bosun, Ben Hicks, and Kyrie Crawford. So thank you very much to you one and all. If you've got any questions, feel free to drop them in the old comments box below. My Twitter and Facebook are both linked there too. So thank you very much for your time, and I think I might follow this fella's lead, go get myself a drink. You all enjoy the rest of your day.